All right, 7 a.m., time to rock and roll. Good evening, everyone. My name is Walter Cook, and I want to welcome you to the Township Futures Speaker Series for tonight, April 22. All you wanted to know about municipal utility districts and were afraid to ask. Ted Stanley is usually my co-host on these events, but Ted decided to recuse himself. He is running for election to a MUD board and felt that, in fairness to everyone, he would pass on participation in this speaker series. But I'm sure he's out there at, hopefully not at the South County Community Center, handing out information about himself. All right, but we've got some great people lined up for you. We've got Bob Lilac, a member of the MUD Board #1. Bob, as you know, known him for a long time. He's a longtime member of the resident of the Woodlands. He's a mechanical engineer and has degrees in industrial management, plus postgraduate studies in transportation and economics. He's lived in the Woodlands since 2006. Been very active in community affairs, and including being a member of MUD Board #1. Also want to welcome Eric Peterson, who is the fairly new general manager of Woodlands Water. Eric is a proud graduate of Texas A&M. He's a civil engineer and worked in the private world for like 22 years, dealing a lot with MUDs from the private perspective, and joined the Woodlands Water as their new, I think your title, Eric, is Executive Director. Is that correct?
General Manager.
Excuse me, General Manager in February of 2023. And my name is Walter Cook. I'm an attorney, lived in the Woodlands since 1990 and practice in the area of commercial real estate and have occasion to have dealt with MUDs over the years. So what are we going to do tonight? First thing we're going to do is talk about the MUD election. There's an election for certain board of directors of the various Woodlands MUDs, and you have them listed on the screen. And these boards will be elected. The election date is May the 4th, but early voting started today. So you've got early voting April 22 through April 27, 8 to 5. And then again on the 29th and 30th from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And then election day again is on May the 4th, which is a Saturday. The best thing to do is early vote. There are 3 locations, excuse me, Shenandoah Municipal Complex, Spring Creek Greenway Nature Center, and the Magnolia Event Center. Do not go to the South County Community Center. There is no voting for anybody at South County this time around. Election day, Saturday, May 4, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Now, it's going to be somewhat of a challenge to figure out where you vote on election day, because Montgomery County Elections has consolidated a lot of voting precincts. So to figure out where you vote on election day, you've got to know your regular voting precinct, and you got to know which MUD you live in. Montgomery County Election has on their website a full sample ballot, which goes on for pages. The Woodlands is not alone in voting on May the 4th. I think virtually every community in Montgomery County has got somebody on that ballot. So Ted Stanley went through the massive sample ballot and pulled out the information for our MUD elections. So if you go to townshipfuture.org/MUD election, you will find a spreadsheet showing where you vote based on your precinct number, voting precinct number, and your MUD number. Or you can just email me at wcook@obt.com and I will email you that list. But make it easy on yourself, avoid confusion, vote early. What we're going to do tonight is cover a number of topics. What's a mud? What do the muds and the woodlands provide to the residents of the woodlands? Who determines and directs the activities of a mud? And what is this thing called the Woodlands Water Agency, also known as Woodlands Water? And what is the relationship between Woodlands Water and the muds? We're also going to hit on some hot topics the muds are and are facing, or will soon be facing. So I want to first talk about what the heck muds are. Muds are what are called special purpose districts. These things are units of local government. They're created by the legislature to provide specific limited services to residents and commercial enterprises within a defined geographic area. There's nothing unique to Texas about special purpose districts. Every state has them. I think Illinois has the most, and Florida, as I recall, is number 2. We have something like 1,700 special purpose districts in Texas, and they cover all sorts of entities. School districts are special purpose districts. The Woodlands Township is another special purpose district. You have levee improvement districts that deal with the construction, maintenance, repair of levees. You've got RUDs, road utility districts, that deal with the construction, repair, maintenance of roads. But we're going to talk tonight about MUDs, municipal utility districts, which basically provide water and sewer service and wastewater drainage to a limited geographic area outside the city limits of a town or city. MUDs became popular back in, I guess, the late 70s or early 80s. Back in the olden day, if you were a developer and wanted to build a residential and or commercial subdivision, you'd go to the city, and the city would provide you with water infrastructure, wastewater infrastructure, then sell you water and sell you service services. But as it turned out, except within the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the vast majority of development in Texas has occurred in unincorporated areas. They're not inside a city or a town. So there's no entity, unless you're inside a city or a town. The city or a town usually can't provide you with water, wastewater services. You might ask the city to annex your property, and then the city can do that. But a lot of developers don't like to be annexed by cities. They want to kind of run their own show for a while. And so municipal utility districts were designed to provide the water services, sewer services, stormwater drainage that you could not get in an unincorporated area. Typically, what would happen, a developer would go to the legislature and ask to have a MUD created for a defined geographic area. I mean, the area where the developer owned the land that it intended to develop. And the legislature would have to pass a separate law to set up that particular MUD. And in that piece of legislation, it would go into great detail about what powers the MUD had. And the MUDs are heavily regulated now, mainly by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, the Attorney General, and the good old EPA. Each MUD is governed by a board elected by the residents and commercial owners in the area covered by the MUD. So a startup MUD would typically sell tax-exempt bonds after getting rigorously reviewed by the TCEQ, who has to approve the sale of the bond, sell tax-exempt bonds into the market, then use the proceeds of those bonds to construct the water service, sewage service, drainage infrastructure, then continue to own that infrastructure, repair, maintain, and then when necessary, replace that infrastructure. As we will hear from Eric and Bob, the Woodlands, as usual, didn't quite do it that way. They have proceeded in a bit different path, on a bit different path, but nevertheless do what all other MUDs do, provide water, sewage, and drainage, stormwater drainage to specific geographic areas. Of course, the bonds have to be repaid, and they're typically repaid from the proceeds of a property tax levied on the property located within the jurisdiction of the MUD. I'm going to turn it over to Eric now, but while he's powering up his PowerPoint, I wanted to mention we're going to go about 45 minutes tonight, leaving roughly 15 minutes for your questions and answers. So using the Q&A feature or that you should have on your screen, please start sending in your questions and we'll go over them after Eric and Bob complete their presentation. All right, Eric.
All right, thank you, Walt. All right, can you see my presentation?
I cannot see your presentation.
Cannot. Shows that it is. Your screen share is loading.
Let me see. I may need to look out of mine. I can assure you, we went over this several times today in a now vain attempt to avoid this, but bear with us. All right.
Eric,
business.
All right, here we go. All right, thank you, Walter. As Walter mentioned, my name is Eric Peterson, General Manager of Woodlands Water Agency. Just to talk a little bit about Woodlands Water. Woodlands Water is the central management agency for the 10 MUDs that are in the woodlands in Montgomery County. So it does not include Creekside, which is Harris County MUD 386. The services that we provide are water distribution, wastewater collection, storm drainage, tax collection, and public outreach. Our vision is to provide exceptional water services for our customers in the woodlands. Our mission is to manage our water with fiscal integrity, efficient business practices, responsive operations, infrastructure maintenance, community partnerships, and environmental stewardship. As many of you know, living in the woodlands, we serve about 120 or so thousand residents. We have 34,000 connections, which is split there for about 32,000 residences and roughly 2,000 commercial connections. WWA's responsibility is, in fact, the 10 MUDs in Montgomery County. Those 10 Woodlands MUDs, each one of them designates an individual on their board to be a trustee. There are 10 trustees, one from each MUD, and the board of trustees is the group that oversees Woodlands Water Agency. Originally, it was created in the 80s. Woodlands Water Agency, formerly known, many of you might have known it as Woodlands Joint Powers Agency, back in roughly 2018-19, after years of, I would say, some confusion as to what the joint powers did. We went through a rebranding, which more closely indicates what we do. We were getting calls apparently on, well, where's my power come from, and gas, etc. And we only handle water, sewer, and drainage. So as Walter mentioned, MUDs and WWA are governed by the state of Texas, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. We manage the water lines that are smaller than 12-inch diameter and sewer lines smaller than 15-inch diameter. And then we also manage the various ditches. In a typical MUD in Texas, you would have an engineer, an operator, a bookkeeper, tax assessor collector, an attorney, and a financial advisor. And they would be different consultants for each one of those. Woodlands Water Agency handles all of those things internally with current staff, except for legal and financial advisor. So each of the 10 MUDs have one uniform financial advisor as well as one attorney that handles all of the 10 MUDs. And that creates some consistency across the MUDs. The vision of Woodlands Water, as it was created many years ago, was to create the agency such that there would be uniform operation and maintenance of the water and sewer as it relates to what now is 28,000 acres of the woodlands. We do not have road powers. We do set and uphold policy, set the level of service that the community is used to and expects. We follow state and local design criteria on the facilities that we operate and maintain. So, there we go. So the main entities that are involved in the woodlands, you have the MUDs, as we've mentioned, you have Woodlands Water Agency, and you have San Jacinto River Authority. The San Jacinto River Authority, I'll kind of start from the bottom. San Jacinto River Authority owns the water plants, the wastewater treatment plants, the elevated storage tank for on the water side, lift stations on the sewer side, and then the larger diameter lines. Woodlands Water, as I mentioned, operates and maintains the smaller diameter water and sewer distribution lines and collection lines, storm drainage, and then we do billing, tax collection, and education, public education. The MUD's job is mainly to set policy, collect fees and taxes in order to provide those services that we provide. And to kind of give you an idea of the easiest way to think about whose responsibility is what, it's kind of like a road system. You have the freeways or the larger, wider, larger, faster roads, if you will. That's typically the responsibility of SJRA. So those larger diameter transmission, we call them transmission lines. And then again, to use the analogy, as the roads kind of get smaller and go into the neighborhoods, that's where essentially the Woodlands Water Agency comes into play, with the lines getting smaller and smaller as they go into the neighborhoods. So it's not exact, but it's a decent analogy. So on the retail side, or the Woodlands Water Agency side, we have over 5,000 fire hydrants, 350 miles of water lines and sewer lines. On the wholesale side, which we call the retail side, typically Woodlands Water, the wholesale side is typically what we refer to on the San Jacinto River Authority side. There are 5 water plants, currently 5 elevated storage tanks, although the 6th one's in design and will be constructed here in the next couple of years. And then there's currently 3 wastewater treatment plants. I like to give this analogy. Some of y'all have heard me talk about it before. The efficiency by which the woodlands was developed is unmatched. The woodlands is roughly 28,000 acres. And if you were to take a 28,000 acre bubble and put it anywhere outside of the woodlands on a grouping of MUDs, let's just say for math purposes, average MUDs 2,000 acres, you'd have 14 MUDs. In that 14 MUDs, you would most likely have about 28 water plants. You would have probably 10 or 14 elevated storage tanks, and probably each one of those MUDs would have their own wastewater treatment plant. So you'd probably have 14 wastewater treatment plants, and that's being conservative on a 2,000 acre development. So the efficiency by which the woodlands was developed and created is unbelievable. As I mentioned, drainage as well, about 1,000 acres of drainage ditches that we operate and maintain. Typically, we'll go out and mow them about 4 times a year. And then we will also if there's damage or there's structural damage to certain ditches, then we'll go in and repair those as needed. About 12,000 curb and storm inlets, and about 550 miles of storm sewer lines. I put this slide up here. We show this from time to time. Since 1994, we've had 6 major rain events that have exceeded regional design standards. And we get calls a lot when there's a heavy rainstorm event that creates this picture where you see the water is above the curb line. In fact, you can't even see the curb. It's just under, right on the edge there. But essentially, when a storm event occurs that is dropping rain at an intensity greater than 1 inch per hour, the system will start to back up. And it is normal for the streets, in this case, in most areas, to utilize the streets for detention as the intensity rises. And then when the intensity of the rainfall event starts to decrease, you'll see the water subside off the streets. That's pretty common. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Bob Lilac, Director of Montgomery County Mud Number 1. Bob?
Thank you,
Bob,
Rick.
while we're passing to Bob, I understand that the chat feature is not working, so please use the Q&A to send in your questions. Okay, Bob, thank you for
I was going to point that out too. But the muds in the woodland are fairly unique. As Walter pointed out, a mud can be entirely self-sufficient. They can source the water, they can clean and distribute it, and they can also handle and process the waste. In the woodlands, we don't do that. Water and wastewater treatment is owned and operated by the SJRA, as Eric noted. And as he also noted, the major distribution lines are similarly owned and operated. We purchase bulk water and wastewater treatment from the SJRA. And all the MUDs do is basically own the local water service and wastewater collection lines and drainage infrastructure. That's all we own, is basically assets. We have no employees. The operations, repair, and maintenance are handled also by a third party, the Woodlands Water Agency. There are 10 MUDs in the Woodlands, not counting MUD 386 in Harris County. And as Eric noted, each MUD has 5 directors and they elect 1 trustee. And once the bonds by MUDs are fully paid, our responsibility has basically been fulfilled. And it begins to make a lot of sense to consolidate MUDs that have similar balance sheets and tax rates. And a good example is MUD 2 and MUD 40 were consolidated, I believe, in 2016 to form MUD 1. And it set a precedent, which I hope we will see in the future. MUD 1 and MUD 6 did make an attempt to consolidate a couple of years ago, but it failed by just a tiny, tiny percentage. And I think primarily because the residents were not properly informed. And hopefully in the future, when we try again, that this won't happen. MUD directors, to be eligible, must own property in the area that the MUD serves. They are elected for a 4-year term, staggered on a 2-year basis. All MUD directors and MUDs are overseen by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. So what do we do as a MUD director? Well, as previously noted, we do set tax rates. And we do this on an annual basis. We set and manage budget and expenses, and we do this monthly. We monitor how we're performing on the budget, on both the revenue and on the expense side. We also set water and sewer rates, but basically this is a kind of collective process with the other MUDs. And for the most part, for all of the MUDs in the Woodlands, our water and sewer rates are the same. There are a few exceptions. And we also have the authority to direct Woodlands water operations, services, repair, and maintenance within each MUD boundaries. And occasionally we get issues that cannot be fully addressed by Woodlands water related to customer issues and concerns. And a good example is relief from when a resident might have a burst irrigation system and a lot of water is issued or dispensed before it's been corrected. Occasionally, we will grant relief, but not 100%. There are many hot issues facing the MUDs, and I think the number one, which has got a lot of attention recently, is we do have aging wastewater treatment plants. Wastewater treatment plant number one was the first plant built when the Woodlands was built. It's over 50 years old, which is nearing the end of its life. So we need to do something about it. And the alternatives are to repair and replace as needed. And the best analogy is if you have a car that's got 250,000 miles on it, and you keep repairing it, the time comes when it's no longer economical to do that. And we're getting very close to that point. The other opportunity is to replace it with another facility identical to what's in place. A third alternative is to replace it with the newest technologies. And they have some advantages and some disadvantages. And one of the primary ones we're considering is the membrane bioreactive technology. This is a little more expensive on a capital viewpoint, but offers lower operating and maintenance costs over its life. And it has other soft benefits that you really can't put into an economic spreadsheet model. Another alternative is while we're at it, why don't we consolidate two of the treatment plants? And I think we've kind of ruled this out because wastewater treatment plant number 2, which was built 10, 15 years, I'm not sure the exact number, after treatment plant number 1, has a much longer life. So it wouldn't make sense to consolidate these two plants with so much life left on treatment plant number 2. Then finally, if we do a new facility, what is the proper processing capacity? Well, over the last 50 years, we've seen that wastewater flows into the plant have basically remained pretty constant regardless of or independent of the growth in the woodlands. And this is due to the fact that many homes are using more efficient washing machines, more efficient dishwashers, more efficient toilets, and low flow showers. Plus, more people are becoming aware of conserving water and just not wanting to pay higher water bills. So this makes it possible to, if we do build a new plant, it need not have the capacity of the present plant. Another problem is we have aging water supply lines, and they were built at the same time the water plants and the wastewater treatment plants are built. And since they're underground, it's pretty hard to determine exactly what we need to do. But there is history, which tells us that one option is to replace these lines based on average expected life. Or we can spend some money, dig up some of the lines and examine them, both non-destructive and destructive, to determine, can we base them on condition, on their condition? And there's been a lot of research done on this subject. And I think we have finally decided that we're going to spend the money to do condition-based replacement in the hopes that we can actually get another 25, 30, or even 40 years without going ahead and replacing these lines before their real life is expired. But any way you look at it, the total cost of all these replacements is going to be several $100 million for these assets. And it's not unlike any city, any mud, or any water and treatment plant within the United States. We've just gotten to the point where we are going to need to replace our facilities, period. Another issue, hot issue, is okay. So if we're forced to do this, we have to do it. How do we finance it? What are our alternatives? Well, number one is to build reserves in advance to reduce bond financing. And this makes sense right now because the money we are getting on our reserves is approximately 1 to 2 times greater than the inflation rate. So we are making money on the money that we have invested in the state bonds and alternatives. So this is certainly a viable option, is rather than reducing our taxes and giving the money back to the ratepayers, is to invest this and make money and apply it to the investments we have to make. MUDs, as noted earlier, do have the ability to issue bonds, but it doesn't make sense for 10 MUDs to issue bonds. Makes a whole lot better sense to have the SJRA issue these bonds and then the MUDs guarantee and stand behind them. Okay, so now that we know how to finance this, how do we pay the debt? Well, the options are an increase in property taxes, subject to the laws of Texas. We can pay for them by increases in water and sewer rates. MUDs can make assessment, or there's some combination. None of these have been decided at this time, and it's all will be subject to future discussions. One of the last issues is, okay, there's a lot of controversy going on regarding the use of surface water versus groundwater. Surface water is certainly more expensive because it requires a lot more treatment. And if we do increased groundwater pumping, that creates irreversible subsidence. So there are pluses and minuses on both sides. But compounding that is even using both surface water and groundwater, that will be not enough in the future years. By the year 2050, Montgomery County is going to come pretty close to doubling in population. And so both of these present use, surface water and groundwater, will not be sufficient. So we're going to need to find additional water sourcing to accommodate population growth. And with that, I turn that back to Eric.
Thank you, Bob. To kind of continue that discussion on infrastructure renewal and funding. He mentioned the wastewater treatment plant. I won't go into that detail. The AC water line, same, and the funding. He mentioned several hundred million, and I wanted to break that down a little bit more for us. As he described the wastewater treatment plant, it is currently under study at the moment. There's been no decision to move forward at this point. It's gone through about a 15 to 18 month stakeholder process where MUD directors, the trustees, community members were involved in a process to kind of walk them through the engineering, the conceptual engineering of the decision making on, whether or not to continue to band-aid the plant or whether to proceed going forward with a new plant. And so there was a number of different options that were provided. And the latest was to go towards the MBR, the newer technology, to replace the old plant with the MBR plant right on essentially the same property. There would be some land acquisition necessary. Beyond the preliminary analysis, there's been no engineering. The next step would be to authorize the engineering to move forward with that project. But at this point, that step has not been taken. The current estimated total to build the wastewater treatment plant number 1 replacement would be about $288 million. Next, Bob mentioned the AC water line renewal, about 50 acres of asbestos cement water lines that are they're in the 42 to 50-year-old range, roughly. They will continue to see increased breakages as time goes on. That too, as Bob mentioned, is in an analysis. No decision has been made to go forward at this time. And that analysis would include the destructive and non-destructive condition-based assessment. In addition to that, in the 10-year plan, there's another 80 million that has actually already been funded and is moving forward. So there's some sanitary sewer rehabilitation where we have failing sanitary sewer pipe that will be lined or renewed or replaced. So the way that these projects come about is as they go into formal design, professional design, SGRA would do a request for qualifications and then a request for proposals from professional engineering firms in the state of Texas, likely, that would then design these facilities. Once those facilities are designed, approvals, both state and local agency requirements are met on the design criteria. So TCEQ would review it and other local municipalities would review it. The SGRA would then take that project and put it out for a public bid to find a contractor to go forward with the projects. That step of the phase would be a few years from now. But that's kind of how the overall projects are designed and then constructed. As Bob mentioned, there's a number of different options for moving forward as far as the funding goes, water and sewer bills, different forms of tax, likely an M&O tax, not a debt service tax, and then there could be fees. One of the things that the MUDs are up against at this point is a legislation that was created in the 2019 legislature was that municipalities, MUDs were categorized in it, cannot increase tax revenues beyond 3.5% over the previous year. And that is if a MUD is classified as developed. And the definition of that is if the municipality or the MUD has completed at least 95% of the infrastructure necessary to supply water and sewer to their boundary, then they are deemed to be developed. And if they're deemed to be developed, they cannot increase tax revenue past 3.5% over the previous year. So I think 7 or 8 of the muds in the Woodlands classify as developed, which puts a little bit of a hamstring on the muds from being able to raise funds quicker. But at this point, there's been no determination on the direction or how the muds would go. There's going to be some significant public outreach that we're going to be doing over the next year. Wanted to give folks just an eye opener compared to the other muds in Montgomery County. This graph, if you can see it, the orange bars towards the bottom are the Woodlands muds, the 10 Woodlands muds in under Woodlands Water Agency, and then the turquoise are other muds in Montgomery County. As you can see, the average rates against the Woodlands or in the Woodlands muds is just under 13 cents. That's 13 cents per $100 of value of your property. And then as you can see, the countywide average is just under 85 cents. So the muds are looking at what would if they went a tax rate or an M&O tax rollback election route in order to identify funding, what would that look like to the average customer? And what it's looking like around across the different 10 muds would be an additional 20 to 30 cents, depending on the mud. So as you can see, the Woodlands would still even be under the probably the third quartile still at the bottom of the list of muds across Montgomery County. The other option is the average water and sewer rate. As you can see, the average water bill across the Woodlands as it relates to roughly 10,000 gallons of water a month and 6,000 gallons of sewer a month is about $104. You can see the area municipalities and where the Woodlands kind of rates compared to the your neighbors all over the city of Houston, Jersey Village, Sugar Land, Huntsville, Conroe, etc. So there's going to need to be some significant public outreach to educate folks on the aging infrastructure, the opportunities that we have on how to go about it. And Woodlands Water Agency is actually partnering with SJRA as SJRA has brought in a PR consultant to help us with some public outreach. And there's going to be a pretty significant public outreach campaign to educate the public on which direction to go as far as the funding. I don't have any indication on which direction that'll go. Probably the more favorable at the moment would be the rollback tax election option. There could be, as Bob mentioned earlier, a combination of several of the options, but we have to keep in mind the average customer's water bill and what that looks like, particularly for folks on fixed incomes and things like that. So we are very cognizant of those things. And then, of course, we will likely do public surveys to gauge understanding and interest on which direction to go. So with that, that's the meat and potatoes of the presentation. I just wanted to give a quick plug to Woodlands Water and the muds and some other things that we do. We certainly do a rebate program for irrigation. We have a Wise Guys process where you can call our Wise Guys out. They are licensed irrigators. They'll come out and do an evaluation of your irrigation system and give you tips and pointers and recommendations to make sure that your system is operating optimally. Water Smart, I'll talk about in the next slide. We have plenty of online resources. And if you hadn't signed up for Woodlands Water Weekly, that's been getting a lot of good response from the community. And that is a weekly letter that comes out at 9 a.m. on Monday mornings. And it started off as an irrigation tips and pointers and some landscaping tips and pointers. And now it's evolved into, it'll talk a little bit about hot topics, things that are in the news, very viable information that one would want to know. And we're getting a lot of good feedback on that. But you'd need to get on to our website and sign up for Woodlands Water Weekly. And as I mentioned, Water Smart, I'll get back to that. So Water Smart is something that in 2018 and 2019, I believe we finished in 2021, the Woodlands converted their old antiquated meters to what's called AMI or smart meters. And those meters allow for us to get up to the minute response of how much water is going through the meter. And the importance of that for the customer is you can sign up for Water Smart and you can control some notifications on whether you have a leak or whether more water than you normally use is going through the meter. Often we find residents that go out of town, they might go out of town for a week or even longer. Maybe they have a summer house somewhere and they come back and unbeknownst to them, they had a leak. It's been going for 2 or 3 weeks, and they have a very significant water bill. If you signed up for Water Smart, it would actually tell you exactly when that happened and give you a notification so you could address that even if you weren't in town. Helps you manage your water bills, helps you manage your water usage. So very, very helpful tool. We're trying to encourage everyone to sign up for Water Smart. So with that, as Walter mentioned earlier, the various locations to vote, early voting started today. The closest location for the Woodlands residents is generally the Shenandoah Municipal Complex there on the southbound 45 feeder. So just north of Research.
Thanks, Eric and Bob. That was a good presentation. While we're talking about voting, I forgot to mention that you can find your usual voting precinct on your voter registration card, excuse me, and your MUD on your water bill. So, oops, lost everything now. That's the location for those important pieces of information. We've got some questions and answers. Excuse me, questions, if I can get them back up. I swear every time I use Zoom, they've changed the program in some way. All right, I did it. Can't believe it. I think I did it. All right, let's find the Q&A. And Steve has provided us a news break. He reports that out of 422,932 registered voters, today 920 votes were cast in the MUD election, 119 at the Shenandoah Municipal Complex, and 1,139 mail-in ballots. So let's everybody get out and vote. We got a long way to go to reach 422,932. Okay, Steve asked, when will Woodlands Water, in partnership with San Jacinto River Authority, develop a comprehensive infrastructure maintenance / replacement plan and communicate said plan to our community? He's concerned about information that's being bandied about in this election process, which may or may not be correct. So, Eric, I guess that's a question for you.
Sure. Well, certainly we are working. We just, as I mentioned, SJRA has hired a PR firm, which we've been in close contact with, developing a strategic communication plan, which was completed last month. And then my understanding is the next work order to go before the estuary board will be approved by or at least submitted to the board by the end of the month, this month, which would allow us to hit the ground running in May. And I have been working to present at various forums like this one to try to educate folks on what's coming. Obviously, there'll be a lot more details when you get into the kind of the meat and potatoes of the projects, but more to come on that, and it's going to be coming very, very soon. I don't get involved in the politics of things. I'm water and sewer and drainage, so that's for the board members and the incumbents and folks running to kind of put out those messages.
I might also add, Eric, that I am a member of the advisory committee, and each one of the MUDs has people on the advisory committee. And we are working very closely with SJRA to monitor everything that they and the consultants are doing. We're looking at the alternatives. We're looking at the details of what we do and how much land we need. We're looking at the economics. We're looking at the capacity. And there are people on the advisory board who have expertise and experience with wastewater treatment plants and running utilities. We have people who are familiar with the economics and the financial side. So reason why it's not a whole lot of public now is because we're still looking at the alternatives, and the final decisions have not been made. A lot of people feel that, well, we're gold plating this. Well, I can assure the community that there's no gold plating going on whatsoever. We just want to design something that works, is not overbuilt or worse, underbuilt. And it's not an easy process, and it takes quite a bit of time. So all I can say to the community, we're working on it, and when we're really comfortable with what we come up with, it will be definitely publicized.
Thanks, Bob. Anonymous attendee is concerned about abbreviation, so let's kind of run through some of those. We've talked about WWA, and that's Woodlands Water Agency. And we mentioned SJRA, that's San Jacinto River Authority, which is another legislative created entity that is in charge of construction, maintenance, repair of these water facilities and wastewater facilities. And then there was one, I think Eric used the term MO, which I'd never heard of before. Eric, can you tell us what MO means?
M&O, yes, maintenance and operation tax, M&O tax.
So that would be a tax to fund exactly what it says, maintenance and operations of the facilities we talked about.
Yeah, not to belabor it, but if you'd mentioned in your first slides the way that the Woodlands was originally developed using mud bonds, those mud bonds would be paid back with ad valorem or debt service tax revenues. And so when you look at a MUD or a community's tax structure, you're going to have a debt service portion and then an M&O portion. Debt service portion can only be used to pay back the bonds, whereas an M&O portion, you can do operations, maintenance, pay back bonds, do projects. Essentially, it's a lot more flexible as to what you can do with those funds. What's still within the state of Texas rules, but that's what the M&O, maintenance and operation tax is.
Okay, thanks. Let's see, is there any other abbreviations? You out there in attendee land, if you have got an abbreviation that you'd like to have a definition for, please let us know. All right, Carolyn Newman, what do Woodlands Township leadership think about the aging wastewater infrastructure? This community is known for first-rate infrastructure. Would our high rating best place to live be impacted if we kick the can down the road on this? Carolyn, I don't really know what the township directors, I don't know if they've taken any position on this. Eric or Bob may know, our form of government really, the township really has nothing to do with water service, sewer service. They're all in the same position we are. We can talk and jawbone and ask and complain, but they don't have any leadership authority. But Eric, Bob, do you have any idea where the township directors?
Well, the One Water Task Force has recently been reformed, and both Eric and I are involved with the One Water Task Force. And that's an open session. We can talk about anything that has to do with water. And in preliminary discussions with the township, this subject has not come up. But I think Eric and I and all the MUDs can agree, we don't want to get into the situation like Houston sees itself with the many adverse comments that have been made in the newspaper about the aging infrastructure, building problems, leaks, and so forth. I think we have first-rate facilities, and it's the intent of everyone from SJRA to Woodlands Water and the MUDs is to maintain our facility in first-class condition.
And I could answer it also from an engineering perspective, and that is you can design water infrastructure to meet the minimum standards of the state and your local governments. And it's perfectly fine. You can you meet state minimums on a normal day, everything's going to flow just fine. But often what I saw in my private practice career was that facilities or municipalities that just met the minimum on facilities typically had issues, oftentimes in natural disasters and in adverse weather conditions. And so I recognize there's probably a lot of different factors that go into making the Woodlands the best place to live or buy a home. And certainly, it's the amenities and all of the wonderful things that make up the Woodlands, but it also has to do a little bit with the reliability of its water and sewer infrastructure. And that didn't come by building the minimum. That might equate to redundancies, that might equate to better materials, things like that. It wasn't by accident that when these natural disasters occur, that the Woodlands has continued to sustain its services without interruption.
Okay, thanks, gentlemen. Here, Edna asks, and here's another it's not an abbreviation, but another entity. Edna is asking about the Groundwater Conservation Board. And does this entity work with the MUDs and Woodlands Water? I have never heard of the Groundwater Conservation Board. Eric or Bob, can you enlighten us on that entity?
I think that's referring to Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District would be my guess. And so there's certainly a good bit of history behind that, but previously that organization created some regulations that required large groundwater users in Montgomery County to reduce groundwater pumpage by 2015, 2016, by a certain percentage. Many of those entities, there were all large groundwater users either joined a GRP, groundwater reduction plan, or created their own. And in recent years, Lone Star's rules were challenged, and at this point, there is no groundwater reduction requirement as it relates to Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District. So I think that's something that likely will need to be addressed in the coming years and identify what the best thing to do for Montgomery County would be. As Bob mentioned earlier, we have a resource. Some of it's in the lake, some of it's in the ground. And we know that when you pump from the ground, it reduces the capacity of aquifers. And at some point, I don't believe it's finite, at some point that will be problematic. And so it's up to us as good stewards of our water infrastructure to make sure that we find opportunities to make sure that that resource is viable for many years to come.
And I might add to that, Eric, there has been some controversy between those that advocate for reduced groundwater pumping and those who claim that we can sustain higher rates of groundwater pumping. And all I can say relative to that is when we started using surface water in 2015, about halfway through, levels in the wells stopped declining. Up until that time, well levels declined anywhere between 200 and 400 feet, to the point where a couple of wells have actually stopped functioning, and they either had to be modified and enhanced or just shut down entirely. And in 2015, the groundwater management area 14, we had an allowance of 64,000 acre feet of groundwater pumping that was allowed. That was ruled unconstitutional. And since then, groundwater pumping permits have been increased up to 97,000 acre feet. So there's still some controversy going on. How much water can we pump out of the ground without hurting us long term? I don't have answers. I don't think the Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District has answers, but it's something that we're all working on. And it's a continuing subject as we face growth in our community and in the county, and forevermore the need for more water. So that's an ongoing issue.
And I don't know that we pointed out earlier, but the Woodlands is actually about 50-50, 50% groundwater, 50% surface water, just to clarify.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Claude Hunter asks, do all MUD directors have contact info posted on the Woodlands Water website?
And the answer to that is if you go to the annual report section, you go to the individual MUDs, click on the annual reports, and within that, it lists the email addresses for each MUD director.
All right. John Staltner, what is the 80 million sanitary sewer rehabilitation project for? And what is the difference between that and the $288 million wastewater treatment plant project? Eric?
Sure. It's basically pipes versus the plant. So the transmission lines that collect the sewage and take it to the plant is what the 80 is. And not all the 80 is for sanitary sewer rehab. A good portion of it is, but it's the difference is the pipes versus the plant.
Okay, so the sanitary sewer is just that, sewer lines, and the wastewater treatment plant is the wastewater treatment plant and doesn't include the sewer lines, I take it.
Not outside the plant, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, anonymous attendee, you may have addressed already, but how much debt from old failing systems do we currently carry? I'm not sure what that question is. I guess that means how much debt do the MUDs, bond debt do the MUDs currently have? I know it varies from mud to mud, but do you all have that information, or can we get it and maybe send it, post it somewhere?
Yeah, I don't have it at my fingertips, but we can certainly get it. You know, the MUDs have done a great job to whittle down that debt over the years. I believe a couple actually have expired their debt and paid it off, some of the older districts. So some of the newer districts obviously have more. It also depends on the size of the district too, but I can get that information.
There are 3 MUDs that have no debt. That's MUD 1, MUD 6, and MUD 36. And the others are making great progress.
All right, another question. What does the Lone Star ground water conservation do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, number 1 is they issue permits for new wells, and they also issue permits for what individual wells can produce. I think that's one of their major activities. And the other thing they do is to focus on conservation efforts. And I do think their job is challenging. They're in a no-win situation when people want to do more groundwater pumping, and on the other side, people want to do less. So I do think they have a difficult job. And I think the best way to see what they do on a day-to-day basis is to either go to one of their monthly meetings, or the meetings are also live online and they're recorded. So that's the best way to learn precisely what they do.
And also this Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District, it covers a bigger area than just the woodlands, right? So it's not a strictly woodland.
All of Montgomery County, yes.
All right, when we went to vote today in the parking lot, we were given a long list of people to vote for in every MUD. We never heard of any of them. What is this about? Do you know who is trying to load the mud boards with their friends and why? Well, this is the usual politicking that occurs at every election around here. In the past, the turnout at the MUD election has been pretty light, and I don't think the MUDs have seen this sort of politicking, but certainly for the directorships of the Woodlands Township, and for state rep and state senator and governor and president, and the good old South County parking lot, all kinds of sample ballots are being handed out. And yeah, you probably never heard any of them. Usually most people don't come to politic until shortly before the election. And do I know who's trying to load the boards? Well, I have some ideas, but I don't think I want to voice them on a recorded presentation. Bob, can you provide any enlightenment on those subjects?
Well, I think this is tough to address online. There are concerns that people want to take control of our MUDs, and I've seen some of that in writing, but I think it is probably inappropriate for this session to get to that in detail. I'd be pleased to talk with people privately, and you can find my email through the MUD 1 annual report, and I'd be happy to communicate with people on an individual basis, but I don't think that it's appropriate for this presentation here.
Last question, does Township Future have a slate of endorsed candidates for the MUDs? We do. Unfortunately, we've been kind of delayed in getting it out, but we will publicize it, and we will have people at the polls handing out our sample ballot. All right, well, thank you, Eric and Bob, for participating, and thanks to all our attendees. We appreciate you joining us this evening. Hopefully, you know a little bit more about these MUDs and what the directors do. You know, they're like many volunteer positions in our government, very big and complicated questions that have to be addressed. And, you know, nobody's going to be happy 100% of the time, but I do know that people like Bob and Eric are working for our benefit. They live in this community and they've got to pay the same taxes that we all pay, and nobody likes to pay more taxes. But if we want to keep the Woodlands the place that it is, then we're going to have to spend money to replace this aging infrastructure. It's just a question of how much, when, and how are we going to do it. So thanks again, and we'll be signing off until our next presentation. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.